Silent Confessions, a morning of pancakes and unexpected emotions. Welcome back to Silent Confessions, Stories of Infidelity. Today's tale dives deep into the unexpected twists that can happen in the most ordinary moments. What starts as a peaceful morning of pancakes and sunshine quickly spirals into an encounter that blurs the lines between comfort and discomfort, innocence and intimacy. Buckle up for this roller coaster of emotions. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories that leave you speechless. Let's get into it. Yesterday morning began like a page out of a cozy novel. The sunlight poured into my tiny Brooklyn apartment, painting the kitchen in soft gold. I felt a rare sense of calm as I shuffled around barefoot, preparing to make a stack of pancakes for my nephew Dylan, who had been staying with me for the summer. Dylan is 20 years old with a mischievous charm that often lights up the room. He's tall, with a lean, athletic build, dark hair that's always slightly tousled, and piercing green eyes that seem to hold on to secrets he's not ready to share. The rhythmic chirping of birds outside mingled with the occasional hum of a passing car. For a moment, everything felt just right. The kitchen smelled of freshly brewed coffee, and the warmth of the sun on my skin made me feel like I was wrapped in a gentle embrace. I was humming softly to myself, lost in the peaceful routine of the morning, when Dylan stumbled into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes and wearing that familiar sleepy grin of his. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice rough and low, still laced with the warmth of sleep. The sound sent a ripple through me, soft but undeniable, like a secret shared in the quiet stillness of dawn. He stood there, framed by the soft morning light, wearing a plain white t-shirt that clung to his chest, outlining the strength beneath, and a pair of gray sweatpants that hung low on his hips, teasing just enough to make my cheeks flush. His movements were unhurried, effortless, as though he carried the morning itself in his stride. Yet it was the way his gaze lingered on me, a fraction longer than it should have, his dark eyes scanning my face as though searching for something, that set my pulse racing. That look wasn't casual. It was deliberate, filled with a quiet intensity that made the air between us feel heavier, warmer. I caught myself staring, drawn in by the subtle curve of his smile, the way his hair was slightly tousled, giving him an irresistible air of ease and intimacy. The faint scent of him, clean, warm, and familiar, seemed to fill the space between us, wrapping around me in an invisible embrace. My heart skipped, and I wondered if he could hear it, if he could feel the pull that had settled between us like a fragile thread waiting to be tightened. He leaned casually against the doorframe, his head tilted just enough to let the light catch the curve of his jaw. "Sleep well?" he asked, his voice softer now, yet no less captivating. And as his gaze met mine again, I couldn't help but wonder if he noticed the way I couldn't look away, caught in the quiet storm of him. "What's for breakfast?" he asked, leaning casually against the counter. "Pancakes," I replied, flashing a smile. His face lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. "Really? Pancakes? You're spoiling me, Aunt Lila." We laughed as the sweet aroma of sizzling batter filled the kitchen, the morning sunlight casting everything in a soft, golden glow. He leaned against the counter, his gaze fixed on me as I flipped the pancakes, the intensity in his eyes making my pulse quicken. I felt his attention, warm and unwavering, making the air between us feel heavier, charged. "You make it look easy," he said, his voice low and smooth, a playful smile tugging at his lips. I turned to meet his gaze, my heart racing at the way his eyes softened, the moment stretching as he stepped closer. When his hand brushed mine to take the spatula, the spark was undeniable, the quiet intimacy between us more powerful than words. "You're in for a treat," I said, trying to keep my tone playful. "These are my special recipe." "Special, huh? Let's see if they're as good as you say," he teased, his grin widening. The pancakes were done in no time, and we sat down together at the small kitchen table. Dylan devoured his stack with enthusiasm, and I couldn't help but smile at how happy he looked. "Best pancakes ever," he declared, and I felt a warmth spread through me, not just from the compliment, but from the way he said it, like he truly meant it. I smiled, but it wasn't just the words that made my heart flutter. It was the way he said them, his eyes lingering on mine as if the pancakes weren't the only thing he was savoring. His hand brushed mine across the table. the brief contact sparking something that made the room feel smaller, the air between us heavier. The look he gave me, playful yet intense, sent a thrill through me, leaving me wondering if he could feel the same quiet pull that had me wanting more. Then, out of the blue, Dylan said, "We're going on an adventure today." I raised an eyebrow, surprised by his sudden burst of enthusiasm. "Adventure? What kind of adventure?" "You'll see," he replied, a mischievous glint in his eye. His grin was infectious, and I couldn't help but feel curious about what he had in mind. After breakfast, we packed some snacks and headed to a nearby park. Dylan was unusually animated, darting from one patch of grass to another, looking for hidden treasures. He carried a small canvas bag slung over his shoulder, which he claimed was for all the treasures we were about to find. The sun was high in the sky, casting a golden glow over the lush greenery of the park. The air smelled fresh, a mix of blooming flowers and freshly cut grass. At one point, he stopped abruptly, turning toward me with a smile that lit up his entire face. "Found one!" he exclaimed, holding out a small, smooth stone. I reached to take it, our fingers brushing for just a moment longer than necessary. His eyes met mine, and the playful grin softened into something deeper, something that sent a spark through me. We walked along winding paths, stopping every so often when Dylan spotted something that caught his eye. "Look at this," he said, holding up a shiny pebble. His excitement was contagious, and I found myself laughing more than I had in weeks. As I leaned in to inspect his find, his hand brushed mine, lingering just a moment longer than necessary. The touch was warm, electric, and when I looked up, his gaze was already on me, intense and unwavering. For a second, the world around us disappeared. The winding paths, the gentle rustle of leaves, all fading as the connection between us deepened, the weight of something unspoken hanging heavy in the air. His lips parted as though to say something, but instead he smiled, soft and teasing, breaking the moment just enough to leave my heart racing and my mind spinning with possibilities. At one point, we came across a small clearing where wildflowers were blooming in vibrant colors. Dylan knelt down, picking a few and handing them to me with a shy smile. I accepted them, feeling a flutter in my chest that I quickly pushed aside. He stood and turned to me, holding out the small bouquet with a shy smile that softened his entire face. "For you," he said, his voice quieter than usual, carrying a tenderness that made my heart skip a beat. As I accepted the flowers, our fingers brushed briefly, the contact sparking a warmth that spread through me, quick and undeniable. For a brief moment, the world seemed to pause, the only sound the soft rustling of leaves, as if nature itself was holding its breath, waiting for what might come next. We ended up sitting on a secluded bench, sharing snacks and stories. The conversation flowed easily, with Dylan opening up about his plans for the future and the things he'd been struggling with. There was a vulnerability in his voice that made me see him in a different light. He wasn't just the playful nephew I'd known for years. He was a young man with dreams, fears, and complexities that I hadn't fully appreciated until that moment. At one point, our hands brushed as we both reached for the last cookie. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt through me that I couldn't ignore. Dylan didn't pull away immediately, and for a second, our eyes met. Dylan didn't pull away immediately. Instead, he looked up, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made the world around us blur. His gaze was soft yet searching, as though he was trying to read something unspoken in my expression. The corner of his lips lifted into a small, almost teasing smile, but his eyes held something deeper, something vulnerable. For a moment, neither of us moved, the cookie forgotten between us. The air grew heavier, charged with the weight of what neither of us was ready to say. His hand brushed against mine again, deliberate this time, and the simple gesture sent a warmth spreading through me that lingered long after the moment had passed. As the afternoon sun started to dip, Dylan's energy seemed to change. His laughter faded, replaced by a quiet intensity. On the walk back home, he barely spoke, but I caught him glancing at me a few times. Each time, his gaze lingered just a moment too long, leaving me with a flutter in my chest that I couldn't shake. When we finally reached the house, he stopped just outside the door, turning to face me. The golden light of the setting sun framed his face, softening his features, but it was the look in his eyes, intense intense, searching, that left me breathless. His hand hovered near mine for a second longer, his hesitation saying more than words ever could, as if he was waiting for me to give him some unspoken permission. And in that moment, the space between us felt impossibly small, charged with a pull I couldn't ignore. When we got back home, the golden warmth of the day began to fade, replaced by the softer hues of twilight. Dylan moved through the kitchen quietly, almost pensive, as he rummaged through the grocery bag he'd brought. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, a quiet current running beneath the surface, growing stronger with each passing moment. The flutter in my stomach grew stronger, spreading warmth through me as I turned back to the dishes, not trying to steady my hands. The air in the room felt heavier, charged with something unspoken, something neither of us seemed willing to say aloud. I felt his footsteps behind me, soft and deliberate, as he moved closer. The space between us seemed to shrink until I could feel the warmth of his presence just behind me. In that moment, I wasn't sure what to say, or if I even needed to say anything at all. The tension between us spoke louder than words ever could. "Hey, Aunt Lila," he said suddenly, holding up a pack of hot dogs. "Ever tried these?" I laughed nervously. We're not exactly in hot dog territory right now. Besides, I forgot to pick up buns at the store. Dylan's eyes lingered on me a little longer than I was comfortable with. "It's not about the food," he said, his voice soft but loaded with an undertone I couldn't quite place. His gaze was intense, and I found myself looking away, feeling a strange heat rise to my cheeks. The air in the room seemed to thicken. My heart started beating faster, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Dylan stepped closer, still holding the bag of hot dogs. "Let me show you something," he said, his tone almost playful, but with an edge that made me uneasy. If you've ever found yourself in a moment that made you question everything, you're not alone. Sometimes the simplest interactions can carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken emotions. What do you think happened here? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Silent Confessions, Stories of Infidelity, for more stories that challenge the boundaries of what we think we know. See you in the next video.